So Mark chapter 6, Jesus sends the disciples out to go and share the gospel. And I think most of us believe that it's important to share the gospel, but to value it means you actually do it. And I just want to give 5 tips for sharing the gospel this week. The first tip is look at your circle of influence. A lot of times when we think about sharing the gospel, we think about, okay, go to Walmart and stand outside and look for a stranger and walk up to them and say, hey, do you know Jesus? You can do that, but a really effective way is to look in the circle that you're already in. Who do you have influence over? Maybe it's a coworker, maybe it's a family member. Who inside of your circle doesn't know the Lord, or you don't know if they know the Lord or not? So start with that circle and try to find a way to engage the people you already know because you already have a relationship, and try to engage them first with the gospel of Jesus. The second tip is to try to memorize at least one verse about the gospel. A great one is John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. So you can memorize that verse, meditate on it, and then it'll be one that you can share with people whenever you do get an opportunity to share about Jesus. The third way is to know your testimony. Try to work it out. Maybe write it out, say it in the car, make it very short and sweet. Maybe make it memorable, where it's, before Christ, I was empty and my life was purposeless. But then I met Christ and he forgave me my sins. He reconciled me to God, and now my life is filled with meaning and purpose. Have you had that moment where you confessed Jesus and you got reconciliation with God? Because for me, it's changed everything. And then you kind of put the ball in their court. And so just know your testimony, find a really easy way to share it. The fourth way is one of my favorites. It's get a book that you love that's about the gospel and just hand it to somebody. One of my favorites is this book here. It's called The Prodigal God by Tim Keller. I've probably given out 100 copies of this book. It's a really easy one. It's non-threatening. You can say, hey, I read this book. It was really, really impactful. I want to give it to you. And after you read it, I would love to meet up for coffee or lunch and let's talk about it. And it's just a really good book that really does share the gospel very well. If you have a book that you like, maybe you want to use that, just hand it to a friend, somebody who you don't know how their walk is, and then meet up and talk through the gospel with them. And that's a really, really good way to engage somebody with the gospel. And then the fifth way is just in everyday life, look for small opportunities to speak about Jesus. Just the other day, I went into a coffee shop and I was ordering, and the person working behind the counter was new, and I said, hey, are you a Murray State student? What's your major? And we just had a little bit of small talk, and she said she wanted to go to Nashville. And I said, one of my friends, Gus, he lives in Nashville. He goes to a church, Long Hollow, so I know a lot about the church. Do you go to church anywhere? It was just an opportunity for me to ask this person about their spiritual life, and turns out the person did go to church, and so we got to talk about Jesus for just a little bit. But just look for subtle ways. Hey, do you go to church anywhere? Just look for different ways to find an open door to share the gospel with people. But one of the ways that overarching things is just begin to pray. Pray that the Lord would open up opportunities and that you would be bold enough to share the gospel when the time comes. So think about these 5 things. Look to your circle of influence. Start there. Memorize a verse. Know your testimony. Give a good book out. And then just look for ways in everyday conversation to share the gospel. Hope this helps, because this week you are a missionary everywhere you go if you're a follower of Jesus. So let's make his name known, and let's go and make disciples.